The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty fields of Oakville, Texas, as John Hawkins wiped the sweat from his brow. His calloused hands, worn by years of toil, gripped the handle of his rusty hoe. At 45, John's weathered face told a story of hardship and perseverance, but his kind eyes still sparkled with an unwavering hope. "Papa, I brought you some water," called out a sweet voice. John turned to see his 18-year-old daughter, Emily, approaching with a jug of cool water. Her long chestnut hair danced in the breeze, and her sundress, though faded and patched, couldn't diminish her natural beauty. "Thank you, sweetheart," John said, gratefully accepting the drink. As he sipped the water, his gaze wandered over the modest expanse of their struggling farm. It wasn't much, but it was all they had left after years of drought and misfortune. Emily's eyes followed her father's. "Don't worry, Papa. Things will get better. I just know it." John smiled, touched by his daughter's unwavering optimism. "I hope you're right, Emily. I truly do." Little did they know that their lives were about to change forever, as fate had set in motion a series of events that would test their resolve, challenge their kindness, and ultimately reveal a truth so shocking it would leave the entire town of Oakville stunned. As the sun began to set, John and Emily made their way into town. The weekly farmers' market was their only chance to sell what little produce they had managed to coax from their parched land. As they set up their humble stand, the sneers and whispers of Oakville's elite pierced the air like poisoned darts. Well, if it isn't John the Pauper and his ragamuffin daughter," drawled Victoria Blackwood, the town's wealthiest widow. Her designer dress and diamond-encrusted fingers stood in stark contrast to John and Emily's simple attire. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood," John replied politely, refusing to let her cruel words dampen his spirit. "We have some fresh tomatoes today. Would you like to try one?" Victoria's perfectly painted lips curled into a sneer. "As if I would touch anything grown in that dust bowl you call a farm. Come along, Chadwick. We mustn't be seen associating with their kind." She sauntered away, arm in arm with Chadwick Sterling III, the dashing heir to the Sterling banking fortune. Chadwick's eyes, however, lingered on Emily, a mix of pity and something else flickering in their depths. Emily felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but her father's gentle hand on her shoulder steadied her. "Don't let them get to you, sweetheart," he whispered. "True wealth isn't in their bank accounts or fancy clothes. It's in here." He patted his heart, and Emily nodded, fighting back tears. As the evening wore on, their meager sales did little to lift their spirits. Just as they were about to pack up, a commotion near the town square caught everyone's attention. A sleek black limousine rolled into Oakville, its polished surface reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. The townsfolk gathered, whispering excitedly about who could possibly be arriving in such style. Even Victoria Blackwood and her entourage paused their socializing to gawk at the unexpected spectacle. The car came to a stop, and a chauffeur stepped out to open the rear door. A distinguished-looking man in his late 60s emerged, his silver hair and tailored suit exuding an air of quiet authority. He surveyed the crowd with keen blue eyes, seemingly searching for someone. "I'm looking for John Hawkins," he announced, his cultured voice carrying across the now silent square. "It's a matter of utmost importance." All eyes turned to John, who stood frozen next to his humble vegetable stand. Emily clutched her father's arm, fear and confusion etched on her young face. Victoria Blackwood's shrill laugh cut through the tension. "Oh, you must be mistaken, sir. Surely a man of your caliber couldn't have business with our local charity case." The stranger's eyes narrowed at Victoria's cruel words. "I assure you, madam, I am not mistaken." "John Hawkins?" he called out again. John stepped forward, his head held high despite the whispers and stares. "I'm John Hawkins, sir. How can I help you?" The man's face softened as he took in John's weathered appearance. Mr. Hawkins, my name is Theodore Worthington. I'm an attorney representing the estate of the late Howard Randolph. I've been searching for you for quite some time. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Howard Randolph had been one of the wealthiest oil tycoons in Texas before his mysterious disappearance 20 years ago. I'm afraid I don't understand, John stammered, his mind reeling. I never knew Mr. Randolph. Theodore Worthington's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. Oh, but he knew you, Mr. Hawkins. In fact, he knew you very well indeed. If you'll come with me, I have some information that will change your life forever. As John and Emily followed the attorney to his limousine, the townsfolk erupted into a frenzy of speculation. Victoria Blackwood's face had turned an unflattering shade of puce, her manicured nails digging into Chadwick's arm. This can't be happening, she hissed. That farmer can't possibly be connected to Howard Randolph. We have to do something, Chadwick. We can't let them rise above their station. Chadwick, however, was lost in thought, his eyes fixed on Emily's retreating form. For the first time, he saw her not as the poor farmer's daughter, but as a young woman of grace and beauty. A plan began to form in his mind, a plan that would secure his place in Oakville's changing landscape, no matter what secrets that limousine held. As the black car pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust and shocked onlookers in its wake, John and Emily Hawkins had no idea that their lives were about to become a whirlwind of hidden truths, unexpected alliances, and a legacy that would shake Oakville to its very foundations. The limousine glided smoothly through the streets of Oakville, its tinted windows shielding John and Emily from the prying eyes of their neighbors. Inside, the plush leather seats and climate-controlled air were a stark contrast to the hardscrabble life they'd known. Theodore Worthington sat across from them, a thick manila envelope on his lap. His keen eyes studied John's face, as if searching for something. Mr. Hawkins, he began, his voice gentle but firm, what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. Are you prepared to hear it? John nodded, his throat tight with apprehension. Emily squeezed his hand, offering silent support. Theodore took a deep breath. 25 years ago, Howard Randolph had a brief but passionate affair with a young woman named Sarah Johnson. Do you recognize that name? John's face paled, and he gripped Emily's hand tighter. Sarah was my wife. Emily's mother. But she died when Emily was just a baby. What does this have to do with Howard Randolph? The attorney's eyes softened with sympathy. Mr. Hawkins, I'm afraid the truth is rather complicated. Sarah Johnson was indeed your wife, but she had a secret she never shared with you. Before your marriage, she had a child with Howard Randolph, a daughter she was forced to give up for adoption. Emily gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. John sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling from the revelation. Theodore continued, Mr. Randolph never forgot about Sarah or their child. He spent years searching for them both. When he finally located Sarah, he discovered she had married you and had another daughter, Emily. John's voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. Are you saying Emily isn't my daughter? No, Theodore quickly reassured him. Emily is very much your daughter, Mr. Hawkins. But she has an older half-sister out there somewhere. A sister Mr. Randolph never stopped looking for. Emily's eyes widened. I have a sister? But why are you telling us this now? What happened to Mr. Randolph? Theodore's expression turned grave. I'm afraid Mr. Randolph passed away 3 months ago. But before he died, he made a startling discovery. He believed he had finally located his long-lost daughter, right here in Oakville. John and Emily exchanged shocked glances. Could it be possible? Could Emily's half-sister have been living in the same town all this time? But that's not all, Theodore continued, opening the manila envelope. Mr. Randolph left a will. In it, he named both of Sarah's daughters as his heirs. Emily, as Sarah's daughter with you, Mr. Hawkins, and the other daughter he believed he had found. He pulled out a document and handed it to John. This is a copy of Mr. Randolph's will. He left his entire fortune, estimated at over $500 million, to be split equally between Emily and her half-sister. The silence in the limousine was deafening. John stared at the document in his hands, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he was reading. Emily sat frozen, her mind struggling to process the idea that she not only had a sister but was now an heiress to a fortune beyond her wildest dreams. "There's more," Theodore said softly. "Mr. Randolph left a letter for you, Mr. Hawkins. He wanted you to know that he had great respect for the way you raised Emily. He watched from afar, seeing the kind and humble person she became under your care. He believed that your influence would help both his daughters navigate the challenges that come with such a large inheritance." Tears welled up in John's eyes as he accepted the letter with trembling hands. All those years of struggle, of weathering the scorn and pity of Oakville's elite, and now this? It seemed too incredible to be true. "But who is she?" Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My sister. Do you know who she is?" Theodore nodded slowly. Mr. Randolph believed he had identified her, yes. But he wanted to be absolutely certain before making any announcements. "That's why I'm here, Mr. Hawkins. We need your help to confirm Mr. Randolph's suspicions and unite these two sisters." As the limousine pulled up to a grand hotel on the outskirts of Oakville, John and Emily felt as though they were in a dream. They stepped out into the warm Texas night, the stars twinkling above them like scattered diamonds, a fitting backdrop for the newfound riches that had just been dropped into their laps. "Tomorrow," Theodore said as he escorted them into the hotel, "we'll begin the process of verifying Mr. Randolph's findings. But for tonight, I suggest you both get some rest. Your lives are about to change in ways you can't even imagine." As John and Emily were shown to a luxurious suite, neither of them could shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there in Oakville, Emily's half-sister was going about her life, blissfully unaware that she was about to be thrust into a world of wealth, intrigue, and family secrets. And in the shadows, the elite of Oakville were already plotting. Victoria Blackwood's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone as she made a series of hushed calls. Chadwick Sterling III paced in his opulent bedroom, his mind racing with schemes to position himself in this new social order. The stage was set for a drama that would rock Oakville to its core, a tale of long-buried secrets, unexpected alliances, and the true meaning of family. As John Hawkins drifted off to sleep that night, his daughter safe in the room next door, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest challenges still lay ahead. For in a world of sudden wealth and hidden agendas, maintaining one's humility and kindness might prove to be the greatest test of all. As the news of John and Emily Hawkins' mysterious meeting with the distinguished lawyer spread through Oakville like wildfire, the town's elite gathered in the opulent drawing room of Victoria Blackwood's mansion. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the acrid smell of fear of change, fear of losing their iron grip on the social hierarchy they'd so carefully cultivated. Victoria, resplendent in a silk robe that cost more than John Hawkins made in a year, paced before the assembled group. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with an almost manic intensity. "This simply cannot stand," she declared, her voice quivering with barely contained rage. That dirt farmer and his shabby little girl, suddenly thrust into our world? It's an abomination." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Chadwick Sterling III lounged in an armchair, swirling a glass of aged scotch. His handsome face was a mask of cool indifference, but his mind was racing. Now, Victoria," he drawled, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Perhaps we're getting ahead of ourselves. We don't even know what that lawyer wanted with old John." Victoria whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "Don't be naive, Chadwick. You saw that limousine, the way that man carried himself. This has something to do with money, big money. And if those Hawkins trash suddenly come into wealth, it'll upset everything we've worked for." Chadwick raised an eyebrow. "Everything you've worked for, you mean?" "Some of us aren't quite so invested in maintaining the status quo." A tense silence fell over the room. It was no secret that Chadwick, for all his family's wealth and influence, had always been something of a wild card in Oakville's social scene. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied the young man. Was it possible he saw this upheaval as an opportunity rather than a threat? "Well," she said, her voice dangerously soft, "what would you suggest we do, Chadwick? Simply roll out the red carpet for them?" A slow, almost predatory smile spread across Chadwick's face. "Not at all, my dear Victoria. I suggest we wait and see exactly what's happening. And then, we adapt." As the elite of Oakville continued their plotting, across town in the luxurious hotel suite, Emily Hawkins tossed and turned in her plush bed. The events of the day played over and over in her mind like a surreal movie. A long-lost sister, a secret inheritance, a whole new world opening up before her. It was almost too much to comprehend. She thought of her life up until now, the struggles, the hardships, the cruel taunts of people like Victoria Blackwood. But through it all, there had been her father's unwavering love and support. John Hawkins had taught her that true wealth lay not in money or possessions, but in kindness, integrity, and compassion. Now, faced with the prospect of unimaginable riches, Emily felt a flicker of fear. Would this change her? Would she become like the very people who had looked down on her family for so long? In the adjoining room, #the Humble Farmer's Hidden Inheritance Part 2. John Hawkins sat by the window, gazing out at the twinkling lights of Oakville. The letter from Howard Randolph lay open on his lap, its contents still sending shockwaves through his soul. "My dear John. You don't know me, but I've watched you from afar for many years. I've seen the way you've raised Emily, with love, humility, and a strength of character that is all too rare in this world. I want you to know that I have always admired you for this *. I know the revelation of Sarah's past and the existence of Emily's half-sister must come as a shock. Believe me when I say that I never intended to cause you or your family any pain. My only wish is to right the wrongs of the past and ensure that both of Sarah's daughters are provided for *. The road ahead will not be easy. Wealth has a way of changing people, of testing the very fabric of one's character. But I have faith in you, John. I believe that with your guidance, both Emily and her sister will navigate this new world with the same grace and kindness you've instilled in them *. I ask only one thing of you: help them find each other. Help them build the bond that circumstances denied them. In doing so, you'll be giving them the greatest gift of all, family *. With deepest respect and gratitude, Howard Randolph." John folded the letter carefully, his calloused hands trembling slightly. The weight of responsibility settled heavy on his shoulders. How could he guide Emily through this when he himself felt so lost? As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, John made a silent vow. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same quiet strength and unwavering integrity that had seen him through a lifetime of hardship. For Emily's sake, and for the sake of the sister she had yet to meet, he would be the rock they both needed. The following morning, Oakville awoke to a town transformed. Whispers and speculation ran rampant through the streets, fueled by the sight of John and Emily Hawkins emerging from the Grand Hotel, escorted by the distinguished Theodore Worthington. As they made their way down Main Street, the reactions from the townsfolk were a stark contrast to what the Hawkins had grown accustomed to. Where once there had been sneers and turned backs, now there were curious stares and hesitant smiles. The power of potential wealth was already working its magic, reshaping perceptions with dizzying speed. Emily felt overwhelmed by the attention, clinging close to her father's side. John, for his part, walked with the same quiet dignity he'd always possessed, nodding politely to those they passed but otherwise lost in thought. They arrived at the law offices of Worthington and Associates, a stately building that had always seemed as unreachable to the Hawkins as the moon. Now, they were ushered inside with all the deference due to honored guests. In a spacious conference room, Theodore Worthington laid out the next steps of their journey. "Now," he said, his tone businesslike but kind, "we need to address the matter of Emily's half-sister. Mr. Randolph believed he had identified her, but we need to proceed with caution and sensitivity." John leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Who is she, Mr. Worthington? Someone in Oakville?" Theodore nodded, a hint of apprehension in his eyes. "Yes, and I'm afraid this is where things become complicated. You see, Mr. Randolph's research led him to believe that Emily's half-sister is none other than Sophia Sterling." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sophia Sterling, the younger sister of Chadwick Sterling III, and by extension, a member of one of Oakville's most powerful and influential families. Emily gasped, her mind reeling. "Sophia? But that's impossible. She's always been so cruel?" Theodore finished gently. "Yes, I'm aware of the history between your families. It's one of the reasons Mr. Randolph hesitated to make this information public without absolute certainty." John sat back, his face a mask of disbelief. "How can we be sure? And even if it's true, how on earth do we tell her? The Sterlings would never accept this." Theodore pulled out a file folder. "We have compelling evidence, birth records, DNA test results that Mr. Randolph obtained discreetly. But you're right, Mr. Hawkins. Breaking this news to the Sterlings will require the utmost delicacy." As they discussed the intricacies of revealing this earth-shattering truth, across town, another meeting was taking place, one that would set in motion a chain of events that would change Oakville forever. In the mahogany-paneled study of Sterling Manor, Chadwick Sterling III faced his younger sister, Sophia. At 25, Sophia was the very picture of Oakville aristocracy, beautiful, poised, and utterly ruthless when it came to maintaining her social standing. "You can't be serious, Chadwick," Sophia spat, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather armrest of her chair. Those Hawkins peasants, suddenly thrust into our world? It's absurd." Chadwick leaned back, studying his sister with a mixture of amusement and calculation. Now, Sophia. Don't be so hasty. This could be an opportunity." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "An opportunity? Have you lost your mind? What could we possibly gain from associating with them?" A slow, predatory smile spread across Chadwick's face. "Think about it, dear sister. If the rumors are true, and the Hawkins have come into money, big money, then aligning ourselves with them could be advantageous." "Advantageous?" Sophia scoffed. "We're Sterlings. We don't need their money." Chadwick's expression hardened. "Don't be naive, Sophia. Our family's fortunes aren't what they once were. Father's bad investments have left us in a precarious position. This could be our chance to secure our future." Sophia fell silent, the truth of her brother's words sinking in. It was true, beneath the veneer of wealth and privilege, the Sterling Empire was crumbling. The thought of losing everything, of becoming like the very people she'd looked down upon for so long, sent a chill down her spine. "What do you propose?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Chadwick stood, moving to the window that overlooked the sprawling grounds of Sterling Manor. "It's simple, really. We ingratiate ourselves with the Hawkins. You, dear sister, will befriend Emily. And I think it's time I took a more personal interest in the lovely Miss Hawkins. Sophia's eyes widened in understanding. You mean to marry her? But what about Victoria Blackwood? I thought you two were. Victoria is yesterday's news, Chadwick said dismissively. Emily Hawkins is the future. And with her by my side, the Sterling name will rise to heights even father never dreamed of. As the Sterling siblings plotted, unaware of the true bombshell that was about to rock their world, Emily Hawkins stood before the mirror in her hotel suite, hardly recognizing the reflection staring back at her. Gone was the simple farm girl in her faded sundress. In her place stood a young woman adorned in a designer outfit that cost more than her father's entire wardrobe. Her chestnut hair, usually tied back in a practical ponytail, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders. You look beautiful, sweetheart, John said softly from the doorway, his eyes misty with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Emily turned to her father, suddenly feeling very small despite her newfound finery. Oh, Papa, she whispered, rushing into his arms. I'm scared. What if I can't do this? What if I forget who I am? John held his daughter close, his strong farmer's hands gentle as they stroked her hair. You listen to me, Emily Rose Hawkins, he said, his voice firm but kind. Fine clothes and money don't make the person. It's what's in here that counts. He placed a hand over her heart. And you, my darling girl, have a heart of gold. Don't you ever forget that. As father and daughter shared this tender moment, neither of them could have imagined the storms that were gathering on the horizon. For in the coming days, secrets would be revealed, alliances would be forged and broken, and the very foundations of Oakville society would be shaken to its core. The Oakville Country Club had never seen such a spectacle. The annual Midsummer Gala, always a lavish affair, had taken on an air of feverish anticipation. News of the Hawkins family's mysterious change in fortunes had spread like wildfire, and now all of Oakville's elite waited with bated breath to see how the once humble farmer and his daughter would comport themselves in high society. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the manicured lawns, a sleek black limousine pulled up to the club's entrance. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as John and Emily Hawkins emerged, looking every inch the part of newly minted aristocracy. John, despite his initial discomfort, cut a striking figure in a tailored tuxedo. But it was Emily who truly took everyone's breath away. She wore a stunning emerald green gown that seemed to float around her as she moved, her chestnut hair adorned with delicate diamond pins that caught the light with every turn of her head. As they made their way into the ballroom, whispers and stares followed in their wake. Victoria Blackwood, resplendent in a crimson gown that did little to hide the fury in her eyes, watched their entrance with barely concealed disdain. Well, she drawled, loud enough for those nearby to hear, it seems miracles do happen. Who would have thought our little farm girl could clean up so nicely? Emily flinched at the barbed comment, but John squeezed her hand reassuringly. Hold your head high, sweetheart, he whispered. You have nothing to be ashamed of. As they moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding curious questions about their sudden change in circumstances, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She turned, her eyes scanning the room, and suddenly found herself locked in an intense gaze with Chadwick Sterling III. Chadwick, looking impossibly handsome in a perfectly tailored suit, raised his champagne glass in a silent toast. The smoldering look in his eyes sent a shiver down Emily's spine, a mixture of excitement and apprehension that she couldn't quite explain. Before she could dwell on it further, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Sophia Sterling had arrived, fashionably late as always, and the sight of her nearly took Emily's breath away. Sophia was a vision in a shimmering silver gown, her blonde hair piled high in an elaborate updo. But it wasn't her beauty that captivated Emily, it was the strange sense of familiarity, of connection, that she felt as she looked at the girl who had tormented her for so long. As if drawn by some unseen force, Sophia's eyes found Emily's across the crowded room. For a moment, just a fleeting instant, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of a shared destiny neither of them yet understood. The spell was broken as Theodore Worthington appeared at John's elbow. "Mr. Hawkins," he said quietly, "I think it's time. Are you ready?" John took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Worthington. Let's do this." As John, Emily, and Theodore made their way towards the Sterling family, the very air in the ballroom seemed to crackle with tension. Unbeknownst to most of those present, they were about to witness a revelation that would change the face of Oakville society forever. The Oakville Country Club ballroom fell into an expectant hush as John Hawkins, Emily, and Theodore Worthington approached the Sterling family. Chadwick and Sophia stood flanking their parents, the very picture of old money and social superiority. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," Theodore began, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I apologize for the interruption, but there's a matter of great importance we need to discuss. Perhaps we could move somewhere more private?" Richard Sterling, patriarch of the Sterling clan, drew himself up to his full height. "Whatever you have to say, Worthington, you can say it here. We Sterlings have no secrets from our peers." A flicker of apprehension crossed Theodore's face, but he pressed on. "Very well. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, Miss Sophia. I'm here on behalf of the late Howard Randolph." A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd at the mention of the legendary oil tycoon's name. What could Howard Randolph possibly have to do with us? Elizabeth Sterling, Sophia's mother, asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Theodore took a deep breath. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm afraid what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. You see, many years ago, Mr. Randolph had a brief relationship with a young woman named Sarah Johnson." The color drained from Elizabeth Sterling's face. Sophia, sensing her mother's distress, stepped forward. "What does this have to do with us?" she demanded. "Miss Sterling," Theodore said gently, "Sarah Johnson was your biological mother." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sophia staggered back as if physically struck, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What? No, that's impossible." But even as she denied it, Sophia's eyes were drawn to Emily Hawkins. In that moment, seeing them side by side, the resemblance was undeniable, the same delicate bone structure, the same expressive eyes. "It's true, Sophia," John Hawkins said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah was my wife. She never told me about you, but she loved you very much. She never wanted to give you up." Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Elizabeth Sterling let out a strangled cry before collapsing into her husband's arms. Chadwick stood frozen, his calculated plans crumbling before his eyes. Sophia, her world spinning, turned on Emily with fury in her eyes. "You," she spat. "You knew about this, didn't you? Was this all some sick joke to you? To humiliate me in front of everyone?" Emily, tears streaming down her face, shook her head vehemently. "No, Sophia, I swear. I only just found out myself. I never imagined." As the two girls faced each other, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Years of animosity and misunderstanding hung between them, but beneath it all, a new emotion was beginning to take root, a sense of connection, of shared history. Theodore, seeing the volatile situation unfolding, raised his voice to be heard over the commotion. "Please, everyone, if I could have your attention. There's more you need to know." The room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning to the lawyer. Mr. Randolph left his entire fortune, over $500 million, to be divided equally between his two daughters, Emily Hawkins and Sophia Sterling. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Victoria Blackwood, who had been watching the scene unfold with barely concealed glee, suddenly found her smug smile faltering. The balance of power in Oakville had just shifted dramatically, and she was no longer sure where she stood. Chadwick, his mind racing, stepped forward. "Surely there's been some mistake," he said smoothly. "Sophia is a sterling. She doesn't need Randolph's money." But Sophia, her eyes never leaving Emily's face, raised a hand to silence her brother. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are we really sisters?" Emily nodded, tears still glistening in her eyes. "It seems so," she said softly. I always wanted a sister." For a moment, the two girls stood on the precipice of a new reality. All the years of rivalry and resentment seemed to melt away, replaced by a tentative curiosity about the sibling they never knew they had. But before either of them could say another word, Elizabeth Sterling suddenly straightened up, her face a mask of cold fury. "This is preposterous," she hissed. "I won't stand for this circus. Sophia is my daughter, and she always will be. No amount of money can change that." Richard Sterling, who had been uncharacteristically silent until now, placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. "Elizabeth, please," he said, his voice low and strained. "Not here. Not now." But Elizabeth was beyond reason. Years of carefully guarded secrets and suppressed guilt had finally reached their breaking point. "No," she cried, her voice rising hysterically. "I won't let them take her from me. I raised her. I loved her when her real mother threw her away like trash." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sophia staggered back as if physically struck, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. "Mom," she whispered, her voice small and broken. You knew? All this time?" The ballroom fell into a stunned silence, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Emily, her heart breaking for the sister she just discovered, instinctively reached out to take Sophia's hand. To everyone's surprise, including her own, Sophia didn't pull away. John Hawkins, his weathered face etched with compassion, stepped forward. "Mrs. Sterling," he said gently, "I know this is a shock. Believe me, I understand. But Sarah, she loved Sophia very much. Giving her up was the hardest thing she ever had to do." Elizabeth whirled on John, her eyes blazing. "And what would you know about it?" she spat. "You, with your perfect little family, your devoted daughter. You have no idea what it's like to live with this lie for all these years." Chadwick, seeing his carefully laid plans crumbling before his eyes, attempted to salvage the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "clearly this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. I'm sure if we all just calm down dash." But his words were cut short as Sophia suddenly pulled away from Emily and ran from the ballroom, tears streaming down her face. Without a moment's hesitation, Emily hitched up her elegant gown and ran after her newfound sister, leaving the stunned crowd in their wake. As the ballroom erupted into chaos, with guests whispering furiously and the Sterlings locked in a heated argument, John Hawkins found himself standing alone in the eye of the storm. He looked around at the glittering chandeliers, the expensive gowns, the shocked faces of Oakville's elite, and felt more out of place than ever. But as he turned to follow his daughter, he caught sight of his reflection in a gilded mirror. The man staring back at him wasn't the humble farmer he'd been just days ago, nor was he one of these polished socialites. He was something else entirely, a man of quiet strength, unwavering integrity, and boundless love for his family. With renewed determination, John straightened his shoulders and set off to find Emily and Sophia. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that the true test of character wasn't in how one handled wealth or status, but in how one faced adversity with grace and compassion. As he left the ballroom, the whispers of Oakville's elite faded behind him, replaced by the growing realization that the town would never be the same again. The cool night air hit Sophia like a slap as she burst out of the country club, her silver gown shimmering under the moonlight. She ran blindly, her mind reeling from the revelations that had just turned her world upside down. Behind her, she could hear Emily calling her name, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Finally, her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto a stone bench overlooking the club's pristine golf course. Moments later, Emily caught up, slightly out of breath, her emerald gown hiked up to allow for easier movement. "Sophia," Emily said softly, approaching cautiously. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea it would happen like this." Sophia looked up, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her carefully constructed facade of perfection completely shattered. "How?" she whispered. "How can this be real? My whole life, it's been a lie." Emily sat down beside her, close enough to offer comfort but not so close as to intrude on Sophia's space. "Not a lie," she said gently. "Your parents love you, Sophia. That much is clear." Sophia let out a bitter laugh. "Love? Is that what you call it? Keeping this secret from me my entire life? Making me believe I was better than everyone else when really, I'm just what?" Emily asked, a note of challenge in her voice. "Just the daughter of Howard Randolph, one of the most successful businessmen in Texas history? Just my sister?" The word sister hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the sounds of the gala fading into the background as crickets chirped in the manicured gardens around them. "I've been so awful to you," Sophia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, I treated you like dirt. And now you're my sister. How can you even stand to look at me?" Emily reached out, hesitantly taking Sophia's hand. To her surprise, Sophia didn't pull away. "Because I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong," Emily said. "And because, well, I've always wanted a sister." Sophia looked at their joined hands, then up at Emily's face. For the first time, she saw not the poor farmer's daughter she'd scorned for so long, but a kind, compassionate young woman who, against all odds, was offering her friendship. "I don't know how to do this," Sophia admitted, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to be normal. To be a sister." Emily smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Well, I don't either. But maybe we can figure it out together?" As the two girls sat there, tentatively beginning to bridge the chasm of years of misunderstanding and hurt, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows. Chadwick Sterling, his handsome face twisted with a mixture of anger and calculation, observed the scene with growing unease. His carefully laid plans were unraveling before his eyes. The fortune he'd hoped to secure through marriage to Emily was now split between the two sisters. And Sophia, his own sister, the one person he thought he could always manipulate, was slipping away from his influence. As he watched Emily and Sophia talking, occasionally even sharing a tentative laugh, Chadwick's mind raced. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If he couldn't control the Randolph fortune through marriage, he'd find another way. After all, he was Chadwick Sterling III. And Sterling's always came out on top. With one last glance at the sisters, Chadwick melted back into the shadows, his mind already formulating a new plan. The game had changed, but he was far from defeated. Back on the bench, Emily and Sophia were startled by the sound of approaching footsteps. They looked up to see John Hawkins walking towards them, his face a mask of concern. "Girls," he said gently, "are you all right?" Sophia tensed, years of conditioning making her want to lash out at the humble farmer. But as she looked at John's kind face, she felt something shift inside her. This was the man who had raised Emily to be the compassionate person she was. This was the man who had loved her mother. "Mr. Hawkins," Sophia said, her voice small. I'm sorry for how I've treated you and Emily all these years. I didn't know. John held up a hand, silencing her with a gentle smile. The past is the past, Sophia. What matters now is where we go from here. Both of you girls have been through a lot tonight. Why don't we head back to the hotel and get some rest? We can face everything else in the morning. As they stood to leave, Emily looped her arm through Sophia's, offering silent support. Sophia, touched by the gesture, managed a small smile. Together, the unlikely family made their way across the moonlit grounds, leaving behind the whispers and stares of Oakville's elite. Little did they know that this night was just the beginning. The days ahead would test their newfound bond, challenge their values, and force them to confront the true meaning of family, wealth, and integrity. The sun rose over Oakville, casting a golden glow over the town that belied the turmoil bubbling just beneath its surface. In the luxurious suite of the Grand Oakville Hotel, Emily Hawkins stood by the window, watching as the town began to stir. So much had changed in just a few short days. The humble farm girl who had once been the target of the town's ridicule was now one of its wealthiest residents. And the sister she never knew she had was sleeping in the next room. A soft knock at the door pulled Emily from her reverie. "Come in," she called softly. John Hawkins entered, already dressed in his usual plain but clean work shirt and jeans. Despite their newfound wealth, he had refused to change his style of dress. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, giving Emily a warm hug. "How are you holding up?" Emily leaned into her father's embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I'm okay, Papa. It's a lot to take in." "How's Sophia?" John's face grew serious. "She's still asleep. Poor girl cried herself out last night. This can't be easy for her." As if on cue, there was another knock at the door. Theodore Worthington entered, looking impeccable as always in a crisp suit. "Good morning, Mr. Hawkins, Miss Emily. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Worthington," John said, gesturing for the lawyer to take a seat. "What can we do for you?" Theodore sat down, pulling out a thick folder from his briefcase. "I thought we should discuss the next steps. The revelation at the gala last night has complicated matters." Emily sat down next to her father, her brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean? Is there a problem with the inheritance?" Theodore shook his head. "No, the inheritance itself is secure. Mr. Randolph's will is ironclad. But the manner in which the truth came out, well, it's caused quite a stir in town. The Sterlings are threatening legal action." John leaned forward, his face a mask of concern. "Legal action? On what grounds?" "They're claiming emotional distress, defamation of character, anything they can think of, really," Theodore explained. "It's all baseless, of course, but it could tie things up in court for months, even years." Emily's heart sank. Just when she thought they might have a chance at a fresh start, at being a real family, everything was threatening to fall apart. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice small. Theodore's expression softened. "The best thing we can do right now is stay calm and present a united front. The Sterlings are hoping to divide and conquer. We can't let them." Just then, the door to Sophia's room opened, and she emerged, looking pale and drawn in the morning light. Her designer pajamas were rumpled, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "I heard everything," she said, her voice hoarse. "My parents, they're really suing?" John stood up, crossing the room to put a comforting hand on Sophia's shoulder. "It seems that way, sweetheart. But don't you worry. We'll figure this out together." Sophia looked up at John, then at Emily and Theodore. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of tears again. But then, something shifted in her expression. A hint of the old Sophia's sterling fire returned to her eyes. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let them do this. This is my life, my inheritance. They've controlled me for long enough." Emily moved to stand beside her sister, taking her hand. "We're in this together, Sophia. Whatever you decide, I've got your back." Theodore watched the scene unfold with a mixture of admiration and concern. "I'm glad to see you girls supporting each other. But I must warn you, taking on the Sterlings won't be easy. They have a lot of influence in this town." John Hawkins straightened up, his weathered face set with determination. "Maybe so, Mr. Worthington. But we've got something they don't. The truth. And each other." As the unlikely families stood together, facing an uncertain future with newfound unity, none of them noticed the figure watching from across the street. Chadwick Sterling lowered his binoculars, a cold smile playing across his handsome features. "Enjoy your little moment of family bonding," he muttered. "It won't last long. Not if I have anything to say about it." With that, he turned and strode away, his mind already formulating the next phase of his plan. The battle for Oakville's soul and the Randolph fortune was just beginning. The following weeks in Oakville were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. News of the Randolph inheritance and the shocking revelation about Sophia's parentage spread like wildfire, dominating every conversation from the country club to the local diner. Emily and Sophia, once bitter rivals, were now rarely seen apart. They spent their days navigating their newfound wealth and sisterhood, alternating between shopping sprees and heart-to-heart talks that lasted long into the night. For Emily, it was a chance to finally have the sister she'd always dreamed of. For Sophia, it was an opportunity to shed the cold, calculating persona she'd hidden behind for so long and discover who she truly was. John Hawkins watched over the girls with a mixture of pride and concern. He was overjoyed to see Emily so happy, and he was gradually warming to Sophia, seeing in her flashes of the woman Sarah had been. But he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing on the horizon. His suspicions were confirmed one sunny afternoon as he worked in the garden of their new home, a modest but comfortable house that was a far cry from their old farmhouse, but equally distant from the opulence of Sterling Manor. "Mr. Hawkins," a smooth voice called out. John looked up to see Chadwick Sterling approaching, looking out of place in his designer suit amidst the blooming flowers. "Chadwick," John replied, straightening up and wiping his hands on his jeans. "What can I do for you?" Chadwick's smile was as charming as it was insincere. "I was hoping we could talk. Man to man, you might say." John's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "All right. Why don't we sit on the porch? I'll get us some lemonade." As they settled into the rocking chairs on the front porch, Chadwick looked around with barely disguised disdain. "Quaint little place you've got here, Mr. Hawkins. Though I must say, I'm surprised. With your newfound wealth, I'd have thought you'd want something more substantial." John took a sip of his lemonade, regarding Chadwick coolly over the rim of his glass. "We're comfortable here. Money doesn't change who you are, Chadwick. At least, it shouldn't." Chadwick's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Speaking of money, that's actually why I'm here. I have a proposition for you." "Oh," John said, his voice neutral. "What kind of proposition?" Chadwick leaned forward, his eyes glittering with intensity. "I'll cut to the chase, Mr. Hawkins. My family is prepared to drop all legal action against you and the girls. All we ask in return is a mere 20% of the Randolph inheritance." John nearly choked on his lemonade. 20%? That's millions of dollars, Chadwick. Why on earth would we agree to that? Chadwick's charming facade slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of the calculating man beneath. Because, Mr. Hawkins, if you don't, we'll drag this out in court for years. Every dirty little secret, every skeleton in the closet, it'll all come out. Do you really want to put Emily and Sophia through that? John set down his glass, his eyes never leaving Chadwick's face. I think you'd better leave now, Chadwick, he said, his voice low and steady. And I'd advise you to think very carefully about your next move. Threats don't sit well with me. Chadwick stood, straightening his jacket. This isn't a threat, Mr. Hawkins. It's a reality check. You're out of your depth here. This is our world, not yours. Remember that. As Chadwick strode away, John watched him go, a mixture of anger and determination settling in his chest. He knew this was far from over. Inside the house, unbeknownst to John, Emily and Sophia had overheard the entire conversation from the open window. They exchanged worried glances, the weight of their newfound wealth and the complications it brought suddenly feeling heavier than ever. As the weeks wore on, the initial shock of the inheritance revelation began to fade, replaced by a new normal that was anything but normal. Emily and Sophia continued to grow closer, their bond strengthening despite the occasional clash of personalities and backgrounds. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as they lounged by the pool of their new home, Sophia turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression. "Em," she said hesitantly, "do you ever wonder about her? About our mother?" Emily set down her book, her heart tightening at the question. "All the time," she admitted softly. "Papa doesn't talk about her much. I think it still hurts him." Sophia nodded, her eyes distant. "I used to make up stories about my real mother when I was little. I'd imagine she was a princess or a famous actress. Anything seemed better than thinking she just didn't want me." Emily reached out, squeezing her sister's hand. "She did want you, Sophia. I'm sure of it. Giving you up must have been the hardest thing she ever did." As the girls sat in contemplative silence, John Hawkins appeared in the doorway, his face grave. "Girls," he said, his voice heavy, "there's something I need to show you." He led them to his study, where a dusty old box sat on his desk. "I've been thinking about what Chadwick said," he explained, "about secrets coming out. And I realized, it's time you knew the whole truth." With trembling hands, he opened the box, revealing a stack of old letters, photographs, and a small leather-bound diary. "These were your mother's," he said softly. "I've kept them all these years, but I think it's time you both knew who she really was." As Emily and Sophia began to sift through the mementos of a mother they never truly knew, tears streaming down their faces, John stood back, watching with a mixture of sadness and relief. The truth, as painful as it might be, was finally coming to light. The contents of Sarah's box proved to be a revelation. Through tear-stained letters and faded photographs, Emily and Sophia began to piece together the story of a young woman caught between two worlds, the humble, loving life she built with John, and the glittering, high-stakes world of Howard Randolph. One letter, in particular, caught their attention. Dated just a few months before Sophia's birth, it read, "My dearest John. Asterisk, I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to give you this letter. The weight of what I've done, of the secrets I've kept, is almost too much to bear. But I need to put these words to paper, even if only for my own peace of mind, asterisk. Asterisk, I love you, John Hawkins. I love you with every fiber of my being. You are the kindest, most genuine man I've ever known. Our life together, simple as it may be, has brought me more joy than I ever thought possible, asterisk. Asterisk, but there's a part of my past that I've never shared with you. A brief, tumultuous affair that resulted in a child, a beautiful baby girl that I had to give up. The pain of that decision has haunted me every day since asterisk. Asterisk her father, Howard Randolph, promised to ensure she would have the best life possible. But not a day goes by that I don't wonder about her, don't ache to hold her in my arms, asterisk. Asterisk I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What I've done is unforgivable. But I need you to know that my love for you, and for our Emily, is real and true. You are my heart, my home, my everything, asterisk. If someday, somehow, my two daughters should ever meet, I hope they'll find in each other the sister I always dreamed they could be to one another. With all my love, now and always. Sarah. As Emily finished reading the letter aloud, her voice choked with emotion, Sophia buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Emily wrapped her arms around her sister, her own tears falling freely. John watched from the doorway, his heart breaking anew for the woman he'd loved and lost, and for the daughters who were only now discovering the depth of their mother's love and sacrifice. She loved you both so much, he said softly, moving to embrace both girls. And she would be so proud of the women you've become. As they sat there, surrounded by the echoes of a love that had transcended time and circumstance, a new resolve began to take shape. Whatever challenges lay ahead, be it the Sterling's legal threats or Chadwick's scheming, they would face them together, as a family. News of the Sterling's legal action against the Hawkins family spread through Oakville like wildfire, dividing the town into factions. Many of the old guard, led by Victoria Blackwood, rallied behind the Sterlings, seeing the lawsuit as a way to maintain the status quo and keep the nouveau riche Hawkins in their place. But there were others, shopkeepers who remembered John's kindness during hard times, farmhands who had worked alongside him for years, who stood firmly in support of the Hawkins family. The town that had once looked down on the humble farmer and his daughter was now split, with battle lines drawn at every corner. One crisp fall morning, as Emily and Sophia walked down Main Street, the whispers and stares that followed them were impossible to ignore. "Just ignore them," Sophia muttered, linking her arm through Emily's. "They're just jealous." But Emily frowned, her kind heart troubled by the division they seemed to be causing. "It shouldn't be like this," she said softly. "Money shouldn't change how people treat each other." As they passed the local diner, a familiar voice called out, "Emily! Sophia! Come on in, girls. I've got a fresh apple pie with your names on it." It was Martha, the diner's owner and one of the few people in town who had always been kind to Emily, regardless of her social status. The girls exchanged a glance before entering the cozy establishment. "Don't you girls worry about all this fuss," Martha said as she set generous slices of pie before them. "This town's seen its share of scandals and upheavals. Things will settle down eventually." Sophia took a bite of pie, her eyes widening in appreciation. "This is amazing, Martha. I can't believe I've never eaten here before." Martha chuckled. "Well, honey, there's a lot about this town you probably never noticed before. But that's all in the past now. What matters is where we go from here." As the girls enjoyed their pie and Martha's comforting presence, neither of them noticed Chadwick Sterling watching from across the street, his handsome face twisted in a scowl. He pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. "Victoria? It's Chadwick. I think it's time we move to phase 2 of our plan. The Hawkins girls are becoming too popular for their own good." Back in the diner, blissfully unaware of the schemes being hatched against them, Emily and Sophia continued to chat with Martha, sharing stories and laughs. For a moment, at least, the weight of their newfound wealth and the complications it brought seemed to lift, replaced by the simple joy of good food and even better company. As they left the diner, waving goodbye to Martha, Emily turned to Sophia with a determined gleam in her eye. "You know what? I think it's time we did something to bring this town together, instead of letting it tear itself apart." Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Emily grinned, her mind already racing with possibilities. Something big. Something that'll remind everyone that we're all part of the same community, no matter how much money we have in the bank. As the sisters walked home, arm in arm, the seeds of a plan began to take root. Little did they know that their efforts to unite Oakville would soon collide head-on with Chadwick's schemes, setting in motion a chain of events that would change the town forever. As autumn painted Oakville in hues of gold and crimson, Emily and Sophia threw themselves into planning what they hoped would be the event of the season, a charity gala to benefit the town's struggling school system. It was Emily's brainchild, born from her memories of outdated textbooks and leaky classroom ceilings. "We have all this money now," she had explained to Sophia and John. "Why not use it to make a real difference in Oakville?" Sophia, who had initially balked at the idea of a charity event, "Isn't giving them our money enough?" found herself swept up in Emily's enthusiasm. For the first time in her life, she was working towards something bigger than herself, and the feeling was intoxicating. John watched his girls with pride as they pored over guest lists and debated menu options. But a nagging worry gnawed at the back of his mind. The Sterlings had been suspiciously quiet lately, and in John's experience, that was never a good sign. His concerns proved well-founded one crisp October morning when he opened the Oakville Gazette to find a full-page ad that made his blood run cold. Town Hall Meeting. Discuss the future of Oakville. Is new money destroying our town's values? Hosted by Chadwick Sterling III. "Girls," John called out, his voice tight with worry. "I think we might have a problem." As Emily and Sophia crowded around to read the ad, their faces fell. "They're trying to turn the town against us," Emily said softly, her voice tinged with hurt. Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. "Let them try. We'll show them what real values look like at our gala." But even as she spoke, doubt crept into her voice. The Sterling name still carried enormous weight in Oakville. Could their fledgling attempt at philanthropy really stand up against generations of entrenched power? As if sensing her sister's uncertainty, Emily squeezed Sophia's hand. "We're in this together," she said firmly. "All of us. And we're not going to let them win." John nodded, a steely resolve settling over his weathered features. "Your sister's right, Sophia. It's time we showed this town what the Hawkins family is really made of." As they huddled together, formulating a plan to counter the Sterlings' latest move, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the old oak tree across the street. Chadwick Sterling lowered his binoculars, a cold smile playing across his handsome features. "Oh, Emily," he murmured. "You have no idea what you're up against. But you will. Soon enough, you'll all see that in Oakville, old money always wins." With that ominous thought hanging in the air, Chadwick slipped away, leaving the Hawkins family to their planning. The battle for Oakville's heart and soul was about to begin in earnest, and only time would tell who would emerge victorious. The Oakville Community Center had never seen such a crowd. It seemed as though the entire town had turned out for Chadwick Sterling's town hall meeting, filling the auditorium to capacity with a mix of curious onlookers and staunch supporters of the old guard. Emily, Sophia, and John sat in the back row, doing their best to blend in despite the whispers and pointed looks directed their way. Emily clutched the folder containing their gala plans tightly to her chest, as if it were a shield against the waves of hostility emanating from the stage. Chadwick Sterling, looking every inch the polished politician in his tailored suit, took the podium to thunderous applause. His charismatic smile belied the calculated gleam in his eyes as he surveyed the crowd. "Friends, neighbors, fellow citizens of Oakville," he began, his voice smooth as honey. "We find ourselves at a crossroads. Our beloved town, steeped in tradition and values, is facing a threat unlike any we've seen before." Emily felt Sophia stiffen beside her as Chadwick's gaze landed on them momentarily. "New money," Chadwick continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "is flooding our community. And with it comes a disregard for the very foundations upon which Oakville was built. We must ask ourselves, at what cost do we embrace this change? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Victoria Blackwood, seated in the front row, nodded vigorously, her elaborate hat bobbing with each movement. "But fear not," Chadwick said, his voice rising passionately. "For we, the true sons and daughters of Oakville, will not stand idly by while our heritage is eroded. We will fight to preserve our way of life, our values, our very identity." The applause was deafening. Emily felt her heart sink. How could they possibly compete with this level of influence and manipulation? But then, something unexpected happened. A voice rang out from the middle of the crowd, clear, strong, and unmistakably familiar. "And what exactly are those values, Chadwick? Exclusion? Elitism? Looking down on those who've worked hard to make something of themselves?" All heads turned to see Martha, the diner owner, standing defiantly in the aisle. Her normally kind face was set in lines of determination. "I've lived in this town my whole life," Martha continued, her voice carrying easily in the sudden hush. "And let me tell you, the Oakville I know and love isn't about how much money you have in the bank. It's about community. It's about helping your neighbor when they're down. It's about recognizing the worth in every person, regardless of their last name or the size of their house." Emily felt a surge of hope as she saw heads nodding in agreement with Martha's words. She wasn't alone. Chadwick, momentarily thrown off balance, quickly regained his composure. "While I appreciate your quaint perspective, Martha, the fact remains that dash." But he was cut off as Emily suddenly stood, drawing all eyes to her. With trembling hands, she opened her folder and began to speak. "If I may," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I'd like to propose an alternative vision for Oakville's future. One that doesn't pit old against new, rich against poor, but instead brings us all together." And with that, Emily launched into an impassioned description of their charity gala plans. She spoke of renovating schools, of scholarships for underprivileged students, of community programs that would benefit everyone in Oakville, regardless of their social standing. As she spoke, Sophia stood to join her, adding her own ideas and elaborations. The sisters, once bitter rivals, now presented a united front that was impossible to ignore. John Hawkins watched his daughters with a mixture of pride and awe. They had come so far, grown so much. And in this moment, facing down the very people who had once looked down on them, they shone brighter than any diamond in Victoria Blackwood's collection. The meeting ended in chaos, with heated debates breaking out all over the auditorium. But as the Hawkins family left the community center, they were surrounded not by angry protesters, but by townsfolk offering words of support and encouragement. Chadwick watched them go, his handsome face twisted in a scowl. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for now, at least, the winds of change were blowing in Oakville, and not even the mighty Sterling name could hold them back. As the day of the charity gala drew near, tension in Oakville reached a fever pitch. The town was abuzz with speculation and excitement, with seemingly everyone taking sides in the unfolding drama. Emily and Sophia threw themselves into the final preparations, working tirelessly to ensure that every detail was perfect. But even as they immersed themselves in seating charts and floral arrangements, they couldn't shake the feeling that something big was looming on the horizon. Their suspicions were confirmed one crisp autumn morning when Theodore Worthington arrived at their door, his normally impassive face etched with concern. "Girls," he said gravely, "I'm afraid I have some unsettling news." John ushered the lawyer into the living room, where they all sat, tension thick in the air. Theodore took a deep breath before continuing. "It seems that the Sterlings have uncovered some sensitive information about your mother, Sarah. They're threatening to make it public if you don't cancel the gala and relinquish a significant portion of the inheritance." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. "What kind of information?" she demanded. Theodore hesitated, his eyes flicking to John. "Perhaps it's best if your father explains." All eyes turned to John, who suddenly looked older and more tired than they'd ever seen him. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "Your mother, she wasn't perfect," he began softly. "Before she met me, before Howard Randolph, she had some troubles. Got mixed up with the wrong crowd, made some mistakes." As John recounted Sarah's troubled past, a brief stint in juvenile detention, struggles with addiction, Emily and Sophia listened in stunned silence. This was a side of their mother they'd never known, never even imagined. "But she overcame all of that," John finished, his voice filled with love and pride. "She turned her life around, became the amazing woman I fell in love with. The wonderful mother you girls never got to know." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, Sophia stood up, her face set with determination. "Let them try," she said fiercely. "Let them drag Mom's name through the mud. We know who she really was. We know the truth." Emily nodded, standing to join her sister. "Sophia's right. We're not going to let them win. Not now, not ever." John looked at his daughters, a mixture of pride and concern on his weathered face. "Are you sure, girls? This could get ugly." Emily and Sophia exchanged a glance, years of rivalry and misunderstanding melting away in the face of this new challenge. "We're sure, Papa," Emily said softly. "We're in this together." As Theodore left to convey their decision to the Sterlings, the Hawkins family began to prepare for the storm they knew was coming. But they faced it united, drawing strength from each other and from the memory of the woman who had brought them together. The night of the charity gala arrived, bringing with it a palpable sense of anticipation. The Oakville Country Club, transformed by twinkling lights and elegant decorations, buzzed with excitement as the town's residents, both old money and new, filed in. Emily and Sophia stood at the entrance, greeting guests with warm smiles that belied their inner nervousness. They knew that somewhere in the crowd, Chadwick Sterling was waiting to make his move. As the evening progressed, it seemed that their fears might have been unfounded. The gala was a resounding success, with donations pouring in for Oakville's schools. Even Victoria Blackwood, after several glasses of champagne, grudgingly admitted that the girls had done a decent job for novices. But just as Emily was about to take the stage to give her closing speech, a commotion at the back of the room caught everyone's attention. Chadwick Sterling strode in, flanked by his parents and a man none of them recognized. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chadwick announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I'm afraid I have an announcement that might put a damper on tonight's festivities." Emily felt her heart drop, but before Chadwick could continue, John Hawkins stepped forward. "That's enough, Chadwick," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever lies you're about to spread, it stops now." Chadwick's smug smile faltered slightly. "Lies? I assure you, Mr. Hawkins, everything I'm about to reveal is the cold, hard truth. Your precious Sarah Dash was a remarkable woman who overcame incredible odds," a new voice interrupted. The crowd parted to reveal the stranger who had arrived with Chadwick, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Who are you?" Chadwick demanded, clearly thrown off balance. The man stepped forward, smiling gently at Emily and Sophia. "My name is Robert Jenkins. I was Sarah's counselor at the rehab center where she turned her life around. And I'm here to tell you all what an extraordinary person she was." Over the next few minutes, Robert shared stories of Sarah's determination, her kindness, and her unwavering desire to make amends for her past mistakes. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Chadwick, his plan in tatters, could only watch in disbelief as the tide of public opinion turned decisively against him. Victoria Blackwood, sensing the shift, quickly distanced herself, leaving Chadwick standing alone. As the gala concluded, with donations far exceeding their wildest expectations, Emily, Sophia, and John found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. The truth about Sarah, rather than destroying them, had only made them stronger. In the months that followed, Oakville underwent a transformation. The divide between old money and new began to blur as the town came together to support the initiatives started by the Hawkins Charity Gala. Emily and Sophia, no longer rivals but the closest of sisters, continued to use their inheritance to better their community. They established scholarships, funded community programs, and even helped Chadwick Sterling find redemption through volunteering, though it took him quite some time to swallow his pride and accept their offer. John Hawkins, still preferring his simple wardrobe and hardworking lifestyle, became a respected elder statesman of the town, sought after for his wisdom and down-to-earth perspective. And on a quiet hill overlooking the town, a new memorial garden was established in Sarah's honor, a place of peace and reflection, where the past and present could coexist in harmony. As Emily and Sophia stood in the garden one crisp autumn day, arms linked and hearts full, they knew that they had finally found what they'd both been searching for all along: a sense of belonging, a true family, and the knowledge that their mother would have been proud of the women they had become. In Oakville, the winds of change had blown away old prejudices and brought in a new era of unity and understanding. And at the heart of it all stood the unlikely tale of a humble farmer, his long-lost inheritance, and the two sisters who learned that true wealth lies not in a bank account, but in the bonds of family and community.